going to do something a little different in one of these mini episodes. Now, if you've been hanging around the show for a while, you know that I love finding character building lessons in weird places. And today, I want to introduce you to something that I just absolutely fell in love with. And it's something that it turns out I just kind of happened across it, didn't know it even existed. It's a book series. And it turns out it is a worldwide phenomenon. And I discovered it probably not by accident, but it is just absolutely amazing. And it turns out that it's also kind of a good tactical manual for modern male agency disguised as a ridiculous sci-fi book series. This book series is called Dungeon Crawler Carl. Now, by an author named Matt Dinniman. Now, if you haven't read it, that's okay. You don't need to know all of the lore in the book in order to get what I'm pulling out of this. But here's the setup. It's 2:00 in the morning in Seattle. It's freezing cold, and Carl steps outside on his balcony in his boxers and in a leather jacket to catch his ex-girlfriend's cat. And it says Donut. And while he's out there, gets out and he's chasing Donut around, trying to get her out of the tree. And while he's out there, every roofed structure, anything that is on top of the wall, on Earth flattens in an instant. Billions of people die. Anybody who's not outside ends up dying. And an alien corporation has turned the planet into an 18-level subterranean reality TV dungeon crawl. And so Carl looks at the ruins of his life, holding this traumatized cat, and he's given a choice. He can either stay on the frozen surface of the earth in his boxers and light leather jacket, and he'll die, or he can walk into this glowing stairwell that leads straight down into what is essentially a death trap designed to turn his suffering into a reality TV show for the entertainment of trillions of alien things. So he walks downstairs. And that's floor one. Right there in the first 5 minutes of this story, we kind of hit a really good tension that I think a lot of men are dealing with today. And that is that, Carl didn't ask for the world to collapse. He didn't ask to be stripped down to his underwear and thrown into a game with arbitrary and possible rules. I think that, that's probably a lot what it feels like to be a boy right now. Right? What it feels like to raise a boy. I talked a lot about how the world our sons have been evolved or they graduated. It's fundamentally changed in the last decade or so. The old structures, the clear pathways to economic independence, the straightforward social rules, the extinction of boredom replaced by constant, hyper-stimulating just content all over the place from the algorithms and whatnot. It's like the roof flattening overnight. It feels disruptive. As the data just continuously reminds us that young men today face economic and social headwinds that we just didn't have at their age. They're caught in a system that I imagine to them feels rigged, but they're constantly nudged towards passive consumption, towards anger, towards outrage, towards despair. When Carl enters that first level, the system immediately kind of tries to goad him into panic. The system's kind of designed to get rid of the humans. And he gets hit with horror and grotesque monsters and absurdly unfair game mechanics. And in our framework on our show, Carl is being kind of pulled into the Conan Brain, right? I mean, literally, he has to fight for his life physically. And we talk a lot about how the Conan Brain is the amygdala. It's the fast, reactive, emotional, and impulsive side. And it's the brain that wants to scream, throw hands, curl up in a ball because the unfairness of the situation is overwhelming. If Carl stays in Conan mode, he's going to get eaten by a goblin in like 30 seconds. Instead, Carl basically forces himself into Sherlock Brain. And, like we discussed, Sherlock is the prefrontal cortex. It's slow, deliberate, strategic, and regulated. And Carl kind of takes a breath. He looks at his ridiculous outfit. He looks at the cat. And he starts calculating. He doesn't waste energy complaining. He doesn't, just rail about how the system is so unfair. He accepts the reality, the ridiculous reality of the floor he's on. And he asks the only question that matters. He takes the time to ask the question, what is my next move? Now, if you remember when we had David Rossi on the show, he talked about the difference between the animal side of this and the spiritual self-mastery side. Again, it's like the Conan Brain versus the Sherlock Brain. And Dave pointed out that fear and panic and anger are biological feedback mechanisms. They're like the lactic acid that you produce when you're running your data, and you can process that data. And the data isn't a meaning. The data can give you access. The animal brain doesn't know the difference. The animal brain doesn't know the difference between the data and the meaning. It just thinks, oh, here it is. And it wants you to stop and give up or get mad or, scream and yell or flounder. But self-mastery is the ability to acknowledge that data and that signal and choose logic and purpose over pure reactivity. And of course, Paul is in a dungeon and there are monsters in it. And he has to get into Sherlock or a Conan Brain also. And he has to decide when to be in what side of his brain. And he does it in a way, he essentially decides what his values are early on. And then he proceeds to live those values. And so, that's the way he is on 401. His feet are bleeding because he doesn't even have shoes. And there's some funny dynamics that turns into, especially, listening to the audiobook is a real treat and a real experience that I've read the actual novels and now I'm going through the audiobooks, and it's just an absolute treat. So well done. So Carl's terrified, but he overrides that physical panic because he decides that he has something bigger than himself to protect. He's protecting the cat, and he's protecting his humanity. He's not going to let the bad guys know. He's not going to let them break him. They can kill him, but he's not going to let them break him. And, we saw that exact same principle in Aaron Blaine, the Green Beret in the protagonist. And Aaron grew up fatherless. He was full of directionless anger, and he went through the crucible of special operations. We talked about how in the military, when you go into chaos, you don't get to choose the environment. You evaluate what's on the ground, and you accept it, and you execute. And more importantly, Aaron shared his core principle for wisdom, which is that we lost. Real strength isn't posturing. It's not puffing out your chest when the world collapses. It's not acting like it didn't God. And in fact, the book depicts people who do well, and they don't have good lives. And it is important to establish and maintain your values. And it's standing between harm and the people you're responsible for, and holding the line with calm discipline. That's what it means to be strong. And Carl, he doesn't survive war because he's the strongest guy in the room. He's not. And in fact, the way that they set up the game, obviously, you have to fight the boss. And the boss is by definition going to be stronger than you. And he manages to survive because he accepts responsibility and he chooses to act, and he chooses to a posture and agency. Saying, no, I can do something about this. Here's the part I can control, and I'm going to control the crap out of it. And I think part of the trap that we fall into as dads, and our sons are struggling on their own version of whatever fun is, whether that's trouble at school or getting overwhelmed or just my son came to me the other day and it was in tears, so sad because he was lying in the bed, trying to sleep, and he realized that his mom and I were going to die, and he didn't want that to happen. And he came down and said that I'm going to die, but he didn't want us to die. And it was a beautiful moment. But it's easy to drop into Conan Brain when our kids are in distress or when they panic, or if they get angry at us, or especially if they start being snotty when they say something like that, or disrespect that. We get angry at their anger. We get frustrated at their unwillingness to listen, or their withdrawal, or we pretend that the dungeon isn't there, and we overprotect them. We shield them from the reality of situations, and we strip away their chance to build muscle. Dan Singley reminded us on his episode early on, when boys act out, panic, they're usually afraid of failure, afraid of shame. And if we respond with kind of a rigid, traditional man-up aggression, then we're going to lost them in a box. And if we show up regularly, if we stay in our Sherlock Brain, they will learn by our example how to regulate themselves. And Carl's agency isn't about being an unstoppable badass. It's not about being a tough guy. It's not about proving to anybody how tough he is. It is 100% about rejecting victimhood, about retaining your agency. The dungeon wants Carl to feel like a victim, because victims are what the TV show is about. Victims make great reality TV. And victims panic, victims make dumb mistakes, victims die in entertaining. So when your son comes home and he feels like the world is unfair, maybe he got cut from the team, or maybe he got picked at school, maybe he's spiraling just because school feels like a grind, or it's boring, he wants to do other things. The easiest thing in the world for him to adopt is the identity of the victim. And our job as fathers is not to lie to him and tell him the world is fair, or to shield him from the unfortunate reality. The world's not fair. The dungeon exists, right? It's not as bad as it is in the book. Well, it's partly what makes the irony or satire is how extreme. Our job is to stand next to him, to look at the stairs, and to help him shift out of Conan Brain and get into Sherlock. So check out the book. It's the link is in the show notes. And I'll tell you, I picked up the book and I read it, and I was captivated right away. And I read the description, and I thought, there's no way I like this book. And I do like sci-fi books in general, but I didn't think, and you kind of like fantasy, that's open. I thought, man, they know way I'm going to like this. And I voraciously got through all of the books in the series, but I didn't even know. I picked it up and I didn't understand that it was a series. And I read it on my Kindle. And so I was like, I'd been reading a long time, and we're only on floor 2 of the dungeon. Like, how are we going to get to floor 18 by the end of this book? And I looked and I realized, no, there are at least 7 more books. And so I read all of those books, and then now awaiting the 9th one. And I can't wait till it comes out. Dinniman has done us an absolute favor. And it is, I got on the train today or this past weekend with my kids, and it was San Diego Comic-Con this weekend. And so they had the train all had ads on, and the train saw what we ended up getting on was a dungeon crawler follow. And I just got such a kick out of what an absolute craze this thing has become. It's amazing. It gives me so much joy to see so many people getting so much joy out of this thing that I love. And I didn't even know that people loved it. And so to all of you crawlers out there already, I love it. And come see me, because we are peas in the pod. And for those of you who are not yet crawlers, give it a try. You might not like it. That's fine. But you might freaking love it. This is Raising Man. My name is Shaun Dawson. And remember, you are a great parent.